The three organizations that's represented on the stage right now are those that they've really demonstrated a commitment, a very long-standing commitment to prosperity and for social change in Africa. If I take GE, for example, Tonia on my right is from GE. GE is our anchor partner for this event. And they're based in Nairobi. Based in Nairobi, and we know them. I mean, they've made significant commitment to supporting local enterprises like yourselves, and also investing in healthcare, renewable energy sectors, just to give us, an example of some of the sectors that they do invest in. Ford Foundation, Maurice, Makoloo, I call him Double M. A great friend of mine. We go a long way. We always have a bit of banter between us because that's how we cut it. But Ford Foundation, these guys are rooted in Africa, and they're rooted here in the belief that East Africans can realize their own dreams, aspirations, and a vision of a just, equitable, democratic, and peaceful region. And that's something that resonates with a lot of the stories that we've heard here over the last 2 days. You made, access, to information, empowerment of communities a major priority of your work here. And really thank you for that, and thank you very much for your support. In the middle, Yvonne from Mastercard. Mastercard is actually a new partner to Acumen. And we really do appreciate your support. And we know that, the work that you're doing here is transformational. You focus on the power of innovation. And human-centered design. You're looking to create new platforms, new payment information resources, and make that available to smallholder farmers, for example. Just one of the examples of the sectors that you actually work in Africa. So these are some of the most exciting innovations that I am aware of, and I'm sure that you're going to be able to, to share a great deal of what else you do. For me, by being a part of this gathering today, there's all these emerging leaders from Africa and beyond, and all of us are making what I consider to be a very strong statement about where the future lies. The future lies in the creativity, in the courage, and the bold action of leaders who are represented in this room today. Each and every one of these guys here, and it'll be a delight, for us to hear from you, each of you, about your vision for this region, some of the specific ways in which you're looking to deepen your impact in this region. So I was going to, my job is very easy, so I'll sit back and listen to you guys. Maybe, if you just take about 3 minutes, tell us about who you are, what you do, the work that you do over here, the relevance to this particular event, and then we'll have a bit of a conversation. That's what it is, and we'll open it up for discussions from our guys in the audience. I don't know whether you actually. Let me do this. Let me start with Tonia. Tonia and I know each other. We met a while back. You've been in GE now 7 weeks? 7 weeks. So tell us about, tell us a little bit about it.
So that's funny, but it's also a disclaimer. Yeah. And up front, I want to say, today I was thinking about what I was going to talk about, and I thought to myself that my avatar for the evening was going to be Beyonce. So I'm Beyonce, and there are 2 other gentlemen from GE over there, and they're my backup, right? All right. For the really hardcore questions, those 2 guys dancing in the corner, those are my backup.
I like that.
But seriously, so I'm Tonia Kariuki. It's my 7th week at GE, and it's been a fantastic experience. Obviously, it's not my first job, so and I don't know how you can tell, but it's not my first job. And I've been in the tech space for the past 20 years. I moved over to GE now, and I'm with healthcare. And as I sit here today, I'm actually representing the broader portfolio of GE. GE has been a fantastic supporter of Acumen. I understand the history is long, and it's been a wonderful history. I'm a true believer that there is a part for corporate business and for social enterprise to come together and really find shared value. And I think that that's evidenced by the partnership that we have with Acumen today. You mentioned a couple of our businesses, healthcare, energy. I mean, we've got a number of big businesses across the African region. We are quite a large organization across Africa, about 3,000, 4,000 people across Africa. And we're present in multiple markets. And across the board, our strategy and the way we execute is through local enterprise. We have a strong focus on localization, both internally within the leadership at General Electric, but also externally with regards to the partners that we engage with and how we execute. So obviously for us, you know, this forum is a wonderful forum. It's an opportunity for us to engage with the future leaders, both of Africa and of the world. I have to say that my engagements have been super amazing. There's an amazing bunch of people in this crowd. Actually, my only hang-up is that that I'm too old to be an Acumen fellow, I think.
Oh, no.
I'm not?
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll talk offline on that. But thank you very much for having me. Yeah.
Thank you, Tonia. Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. Tonia, you know, with your 7 weeks, but you speak as though you're a veteran, and I'm sure that you know, it's a testament to GE as an organization. So we'll move to Yvonne. Yvonne, Mastercard Labs. You know, yes. Tell us a little bit about you and also about your work.
Okay, so my name is Yvonne Njeri, and I lead marketing and outreach at Mastercard Labs for Financial Inclusion. Mastercard Labs for Financial Inclusion came to be in a really interesting and unique way, so we think. Mastercard is an organization, it's in the payment technology field, as most of you would know, I hope you know. So it came about as a partnership between Mastercard and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And this is because the two organizations are very passionate about financial inclusion. There is 2 to 3 billion people in the world who are financially excluded, which means they're not able to manage financial risks well, and when shocks happen, you know, they get carried over by the current. So we thought, okay, how can we create solutions, and digital solutions at that, that can actually help some of these people get into the formal financial system, enable them to access credit, enable them to access savings, and be able to manage their risks better. In that sense, get or lead more empowered lives. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came together with Mastercard and formed the Mastercard Labs for Financial Inclusion. We're one of 8 labs globally that belong to Mastercard, but we're the only lab in Africa, and we're the only lab that focuses on financial inclusion. It's very exciting for us who work here, because we feel that Africa is the hub for technology. Yes, there's Silicon Valley, there's London, but really, if you look at how Africans have taken to technology, mobile technology, for example, you know, they say that Africa has leapfrogged. We think we haven't leapfrogged, we're actually here. We're here and we're making a statement, and what better place to actually create solutions that are going to impact the bottom of the pyramid than be here. So it's really exciting. It's so awesome to be in this space, to interact with a lot of the Acumen fellas. I'm like you, Tonia. I'm like, okay, so like, how do I apply for this program? I mean, you guys are so awesome, and some of the inspiring stories that I've had today have been really touching, even from a personal point of view, and I look forward to just taking them back. So it's a pleasure for me to be here.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you. That's Yvonne. Thank you. And last but not least is Maurice, of course, fondly known as Double M. Maurice and I, you know, was it last year? We were involved in a table banking initiative. And I don't know whether you're actually going to be touching on that a little bit, but it is an initiative that is led by the Deputy President's wife, and it's transforming lives across rural Kenya. And it's through the support of Maurice and Maurice's institution. So Maurice, tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you, Duncan. I'm glad you only talked about that and not many other things. So. I was telling Duncan that I'm a member of the bar, and so I would rather be at the bar rather than here. So but first, allow me to congratulate all the Acumen Fellows on such amazing work that you're doing. I've sat here from when it opened, and this morning as we were doing the Good Society conversations, it was just so inspiring to see every cohort say, you know, we are the best. You know, everyone knows that 2016 is the best and all that. And I said,
now you're from the Pandora's box.
Some said 2014 is the bestest. Some said, you know, and I said, well, I am hoping to apply, and when I do, you will regret why you did not wait for our cohort. So, yesterday, as we gathered here, and as I felt the energy, I couldn't feel any less than what Chinua Achebe talked about in his book, Things Fall Apart. And he said, when we gather in a moonlit village, it is not the moon that brings us together, for each one of us can see it from his own compound. But we do so because it is good for kinsmen to be together. And listening to these stories, it couldn't be any more clearer why, for the first time ever in your history, this global gathering is happening, and I congratulate you on that. The Ford Foundation, as you may know, is an 80-year-old person, organization, and certainly an 80-year-old person has some experiences, some knowledge, but quite often it's knowledge of things that have passed. And so they could share that, but they are in need of being challenged by the things that are happening. But within our 80-year history globally, but also in Africa, we have 4 offices. Cairo, which takes care of MENA, opened in 1959. Lagos for West Africa opened in 1960. Nairobi for Eastern Africa, that I'm privileged to manage at this time, opened in 1962. And the baby of the foundation in Johannesburg opened in 1994. And at all times, the foundation believes that, one, the status quo that we have today is unacceptable and that it is possible to change it. Number two, that the best change that is going to last is when people closer to the problem are not only at the forefront of that. And so we say that we are working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide and literally doing that. And so some of you may be aware of some of our flagship work, like the International Fellowships Program, the IFP, which over 10 years graduated at the postgraduate level 4,300 masters and PhDs in different fields across the world. And in a sense, this was a dry run for me, because on the 4th and the 5th of May, we are going to convene a number of those fellows from Eastern Africa to just kind of reconnect and reflect. Some of them have branched off to different levels of leadership. The governor of Kwale County, for example, is a fellow. The speaker of the Turkana County is a fellow. We have Senator Agnes Nzani, amongst others. So, and we have people in businesses, we have people in government. And for us, really, this is a question of going back to the community that is the very, very genesis of who we are. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Maurice. And I just want to draw on that. I want to draw on those 80 years of, of insights and wisdom, but also the fact that, you do have just drawing on your perspective in terms of the social work that you're doing, the policy frameworks or issues that you're addressing within the region. What do you see are the gaps in leadership and capacity in the region, more specifically, and also, how are you going about addressing these issues where the gaps lie? What exactly are you doing to address them?
Thank you very much. I think for me, the gap is both at an individual person level, but also at institutional levels. So beginning with civil society, with all its challenges, civil society has been, and will continue to be a critical player in social transformation of societies across the world. However, we are seeing civil society organizations and the sector itself under stress. And so one of the things that we are trying to do is to ensure that civil society organizations are a lot more robust, have a lot more resilience, and a lot more innovation, and are capable of taking risk, but also staying for the long haul, because this is not a short flight. This is really a long race that it is going to do. And we think that if we are in a position to help civil society organizations to be capable of having conversations amongst themselves, but also with unusual partners, with government agencies, with private sector, because many times there is very little going on in terms of conversations between these partners. And yet these are aspects of, if you may, the three African-legged stool, where you have a private sector playing its role, government playing its role, and the civil society stroke citizenry. And together, that partnership enhances the quality of service provision. So that is at the institutional level, and what we are doing is trying to support that. But there is a much deeper problem, in our view, in terms of a gap. And that is what you could call a deficit of trust. And you see it in many ways. Some of you who have followed politics and elections in this country may know that our electoral management body aimed to register about 9 million new voters. They ended up with a paltry 4 million. And if you think about it, there is just a question of apathy and people feeling that their voice doesn't count, the vote doesn't count. So they have very little trust in government. They have little trust in politics. They have little trust, really, in some ways, in just what could make things work. And if you think about leaders, we also find that leaders have very little trust amongst themselves, because some think it is a very high-stakes game, so they feel that they cannot make themselves very vulnerable to their colleagues and that kind of stuff. And so people make mistakes. So how have we approached that? We have tried in different ways to create platforms where civil society leaders, together with particularly civil society leaders, are capable of making themselves vulnerable so that they can develop support mechanisms amongst themselves. Because they should be able to talk. If you are a lady, you should be able to talk about what it means to stay late, to submit a proposal to Maurice, when Mr. Husband expects you to have a dinner date, for example, and if you miss that dinner date, you are going home to an angry partner, you sleep 2 hours because you stay up too late, you come back in the office tomorrow, red-eyed and just irritable, and before long, you acquire a name amongst your staff. That cannot be a strong organization. So creating moments for people to just be vulnerable and to support one another is one thing that we're doing, but also just trying to get people to really do a little more of trusting.
You talked about the three legs of a stool in terms of partnerships. And I just wonder whether you play a proactive role in terms of facilitating and bringing together the various parties. Do you do that, or do you just assume that they will play their role and that some magic is going to happen?
So let me give you 2 examples of that. We have discoveries of, say, quantities of large oil in Turkana and mineral deposits in coastal parts of this country and all that. But if you think about the government agencies that are there, they're pretty young. They do not know how well to negotiate, even on behalf of the communities or even on their own behalf. So some of the things that we are actually doing is through innovative grants to get them to come together and kind of say what could work in a conversation, in a situation where civil society, communities, private sector, and governments are working together. So really, those are things that we are doing. The other thing that we've also noticed, if you recall, at some point, President Obama lamented that he had done so much, but he realized that he had not communicated enough what he had done. And so we have also tried to get into developing mechanisms where government agencies and leaders, for that matter, can communicate better what they do. Because if they do not communicate what they do well, it doesn't matter how well they do it. People just don't get it, then that trust that we're talking about doesn't occur at all.
Great, thanks for that, Maurice. Thank you so much for that explanation. Now, I just wanted to bring in Yvonne, and from the perspective of Mastercard, you guys, you've taken big bets on technology, but as a tool to help communities come out of poverty.
Yes.
So from your perspective, what do you see as some of the most important trends, for growth in the region with regards to tech, communities, poverty, and then how are you supporting, those trends?
Okay. Yeah. I think we see quite a number of trends actually, but I'd like to highlight 3 or 4 of them. One of them is just technology itself. Technology is growing leaps and bounds all over the world. And as I mentioned, Africa is not getting left behind. It's very much there. And what is interesting is that the technology cuts across multiple layers and segments of life. So from the upper middle class to the low income earners, technology still has a way of reaching those people. So one of the things we've seen is that technology is not really for the privileged. It's amazing how many people have Facebook accounts, even in rural areas where they have pockets of data. And even with the initiatives that companies like Facebook actually have, this only allows a wide variety of people to access technology. So one of the trends we're seeing is that whilst before we'd think that technology was only the preserve of the wealthy or the privileged, it actually has cut across. And that's why we look to, even for our own financial inclusion initiatives, say with micro traders, for example, we're looking to see how we can bring in low-cost technology, low-cost to them, and so it's easy to access to them at the bottom of the pyramid. Another thing that's really interesting that we've seen is a trend. It's just like consumer awareness and consumer behavior. And again, this is something that we thought was the preserve of the wealthy, the privileged, but we're seeing it across. Even when we have pilots like in Kibera and Kawangware, some of the questions that consumers ask and customers ask are the very same ones we experience in very urban areas. So we're finding that customers are very discerning, they're very demanding, so customer demands have gone up. Let me just give you an example, Duncan. I think one of the things that we found that's really interesting is when we're working with micro traders, is they're actually asking for financial services that speak to them. And they're challenging the banks. And banks, have been doing this for years and years. And they're like, listen, this is the loan product that we have. And it's really awesome. It's color green or blue or whatever. And they do all their positioning. But the traders are saying, it doesn't work for me. I'm looking for microcredit. If I can get credit in the morning, just even 100 shillings that I can pay back at the end of the day at little interest, I'd be really happy. So it's interesting how consumers, even at the bottom of the pyramid, are challenging the traditional ways of thinking. And this leads to my other third point. As a trend we've seen, there's been new entrants getting into the market, even here in Africa. So traditional lenders are sort of getting sidelined slowly. We're seeing people like Misoni, like Tala, micro lenders, people who are coming up with very different types of algorithms to assess risk. For people who before, were not being served. And these are new markets that are being created, and it's something that's really exciting, and also quite a bit of a challenge, especially for us, even as young leaders, to think, how can we actually tap into that market? How can we address the needs and the demands that these consumers are making? Even though, traditionally we thought, okay, we have this sorted, but there's clearly a gap that needs to be addressed there. And then the fourth trend that we've seen, has also been very interesting, and it's data. And I know you guys know, data, they say data is a new natural resource. Data is now becoming one of the key things in the world and a key term or terminology that's being used. And the reason why we find it interesting at Mastercard is because when it comes to financial inclusion, it's actually creating visibility for people who are previously invisible. So farmers who for all intents and purposes, did not exist in the ecosystem. Now, because of their transaction histories, we can tell there is Mama Njeri, of course it's Mama Njeri, who sells avocados in Nandi Hills. And because of the fact that she's been selling these avocados over a period of time, and we can tell the quantity, we can tell how much she has been selling it for, we can see how much money she's gotten her produce for, we're able to then give her a voice and give her a sense of belonging and a sense of dignity. And she can now approach financial service providers and say, this is my history. You can see my track record. I would like to access certain services. So I'd say those are the trends that we're seeing. They're really exciting, and I'm sure there's also new trends that are going to keep coming up. As Mastercard, what we're trying to do is we have a goal to reach 500 million people by 2020 and 40 million micro traders. Wow. And it's quite hefty.
That's a huge goal.
It is. It's a really big job. But one of the things that we're trying to do is work together with partners. I like what you said about the three-legged stool. We recognize that we're not able to do it alone, that financial inclusion is actually one of those really big bites that we need to take. So we partner with people like Acumen. We partner with you guys as well in all your individual businesses as you look to do social good and to empower the bottom of the pyramid. We want to see if we can work together with you. And all our projects and all our solutions do encompass technology, but we look for strong partnerships and for people who just think the same way we do about financial inclusion.
Yvonne, thank you so much. That's there's a lot of detail there.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to do was just pick up on the aspect of local enterprises, but also bring in Tonia, because GE has you work with the local enterprises, especially in the sectors that we talked about, the healthcare sector, the energy sectors, and I just wanted, and in that process, you're also helping to build an ecosystem, of strong local enterprises. So what do you see as the greatest opportunities for GE to engage with local business today? And how could this type of engagement grow over time?
Okay. So, I like what you were saying, Yvonne, around the concept of that it's a broader ecosystem, and empowering that ecosystem is what really leads to all of us moving forward together. And I think that's really the way we look at it at GE. It's not, on the one hand, there's GE, the corporate, and then there's, the whole ecosystem around us, whether it's public sector, whether it's small businesses, and so on. And I think what we quickly learned, particularly across Africa, was that if we don't take the journey with our partners, and particularly the small and medium enterprises, that we weren't going to get to where we wanted to get to and get there quick enough. I believe that the SME community is really the economic lifeblood of this continent. I think when you start to look at the issues affecting Africa in general, issues around youth unemployment, I don't think that there's ever going to be enough GEs and Mastercards and Fords and Acumens to provide employment for all these young Africans right now. So it really means that our small and medium businesses have to grow, and they have to provide employment for our youth and all of that. But then there's two dimensions to that story as well. There's the mom and pop shops, which are great, and I think that huge economies have been built. America was built on mom and pop shops, and we love that story. Across Africa, we know that they're there, but they're very survivalist in that stage. But then there's a second category, which is really the high growth, potentially high growth small businesses. And we really like to focus around those areas, and particularly where they're aligned with our business. So if you think about it, we work through a whole bunch of suppliers, vendors, facility providers, and so on, who are all primarily small and medium enterprises. And so from our perspective, the ability for them to be able to provide the kind of service that we're looking for, to be able to serve our customers in the way that, and to give the customer experience that we want our customers to have, even though it's delivered through a third party, becomes super important to us as an organization. But we're also clear that we have to take an active role in ensuring that there's the right level of skill, capacity in those organizations to deliver those services on our behalf and deliver those services to us as GE. So over the past few years, and under the leadership of one of my colleagues here, Ross, we've taken a journey that really allowed us to invest in our supplier ecosystem, in our partner ecosystem, and really invest in different ways. So if you talk to a typical small or medium or small and growing business, they'll tell you they probably have three main challenges. Access to information, right? So whether it's learning how to grow my business, that sort of thing. Access to finance is a big challenge. And sometimes, they're all interconnected. And access to markets, right? And then when you flip that over and start to look at the general corporate organization, and in this case, speaking of GE generally, and you start to look at the strengths that GE could bring to a relationship like that. So first of all, I mean, just internally, the kind of strengths we have are strengths in simple things like, how do we work with budgets? How do we build business? How do you grow targets? That sort of thing. And that's information that's intrinsic to the company. How do we start bringing that learning to our supplier ecosystem and then broadening that across multiple or scaling that through the SME ecosystem? I think from an information perspective, and this for me is really around, do you have the right information to make the right decisions, We have an increased investment from a technology perspective in data, in insights, in technology platforms ourselves as GE. And how do we share that with our partners? That's an important part of how we really want to empower the broader ecosystem. And then when you think of the access to markets, I mean, the truth is, and you guys know in the room, you start up a business, you have a fantastic idea, you've got an MVP, your minimal viable product, you're ready to go, you're bullish, you're excited, and you can't get anybody to open the door when you go knock on that door, right? And I think that the one thing that corporates can bring to that equation is really, for lack of a better term, and not that I'm patting us on the back, but it's clout, that allows us to get doors open. And if we partner with local enterprises, it then opens up a much wider and a much broader market for the enterprises that we work with. But the second piece, and I started off by talking about it being an ecosystem, is there's multiple players to this. So the first piece obviously is the ecosystem that we work through, that we work with. The second piece is obviously government, right? And that's a big player. In fact, in his three-legged stool, which we keep referring to as an analogy, and actually on this stage here, we should have had one big chair here for a government guy. But when you think of government, and particularly across Africa today, some of the stuff that we're struggling with as far as government is concerned, and when you look at it from a GE lens, is really policy. What's government policy on renewable energy, for example? How much of that is there, What's government policy on cloud data, data that sits in the cloud, on privacy? How many governments across emerging markets actually have policies to address that sort of challenge? Or better yet, how many of them actually know? I mean, you may not have the policy, but do you have the IP internally that allows you to build that sort of policy that's the right policy for your market? How do we influence to ensure that there's a level playing field for small and growing businesses to actually be successful, whether it's from a financial policy perspective, all the way through to the other issues that I've named. And so we really play a big role as far as influencing government policy is concerned to create a broader and a more level playing field for small and growing businesses to actually succeed. And then from the wonderful SDGs, and I always look at those, and I always think it's a great starting point. I think, people often talk about social enterprise. I think the way we do business has changed significantly. It's almost a misnomer now, because I don't think that any corporate business will continue to survive unless they turn themselves into some form of a social enterprise. Because there's a way for us to do business, like I said earlier, while driving societal gains, right? It doesn't help us if people don't have access to healthcare, but those are the same people that are coming to work at GE every day. It doesn't help us if people don't have jobs or the infrastructure is not servicing the community and so on. So we're aware of that fact, and we kind of look at it from that perspective. But also what we do is really focus our industrial efforts around addressing real challenges to society today. So if you think about just even taking the example of the SDGs and the two examples that you've shared with us. So you look at renewable energy and you start to think of the challenge of climate change, and you start to imagine what we're doing as GE in terms of innovating in that sector to bring cleaner energy into the world, right? If you think of healthcare, and this for me is, it's super personal. I think it's personal to everybody. And what we're trying to do in terms of, even at the very basics, maternal infant care, infant mortality and that sort of thing, and the work that we're doing in healthcare, there's no way that we go about not being a social enterprise. Yeah. I think that goes hand in hand. And so, I like that combination of factors. By the way, this is why I joined GE, just for the record.
Excellent.
Yeah, so in terms of how we can then partner, I think that was your second question, or what was your second question?
Yeah, it was just about how the engagement can grow. But what I was thinking is that given we're trying to just shine a light in terms of the work that you're doing,
right?
But also maybe just to look at what we would wish to get from the audience. And what kind of advice would you give these guys who are gathered here in terms of how they can engage and how they can work with G, and maybe in just a short time, then I can pass it on to the
same question. Okay, so it's funny. I've spoken to so many people this week, and by the way, I mean it's just everybody is. I think the generations have changed. You know, the things that people here are talking about, I promise you, I was not talking about this stuff when I was your age. I was just, you know, these are not the things I was focused on. It's amazing to see this happening. A couple of things from a corporate perspective. You know, I always say, and I said to somebody earlier today, it's like a dating game. You know, you meet a girl, you like her, she kind of likes you. You know, you go out on a date, you have a drink, and, you know, 2 dates later, you really want to know what makes her tick, because, you know, your end goal is to end up in a partnership with this girl, I hope, right?
You're taking notes.
So, and that's the way I see it in terms of, you know, the people in this room and their engagement with corporates such as GE. It's really about understanding where the point of shared value is, where the point of mutual benefit is. I don't know that corporates would go around doing stuff like, oh, you've got a great idea. It has nothing to do with anything that I want to do, but because it's so fantastic, why don't we partner with you and invest in your business? I think pay attention to the points that matter to that corporate, because that's the point when you fall in love. And your aim is to fall in love with each other and build this strong partnership moving forward. So that'll be the first piece of advice. I think the second piece of advice is to really be, I think there's a bit of self-awareness and reflect on the practicalities of the environment that we operate in, and really think of the bigger picture around beyond your space. There's such a huge opportunity particularly across emerging markets, for us to partner, bring ideas together, and make them not 20 small ideas, but really make 1 or 5 or 10 really big ideas that can scale. And really the last piece, that can scale. And so those would be the 2 things I'd leave you with. How do the ideas come together? You guys are a cohort or a group, and you're probably doing 1 to 3 things, and you have opportunities to leverage each other to build ideas that can scale. And the second piece is, allow us to fall in love with you.
Thank you for that. Njeri, do you want to add anything onto that?
I think the only thing I'd want to add into the falling in love piece is, I think one of the things we've come to learn at Mastercard is just going through the whole innovation process, is that, you know, from ideation to when you create, you know, the prototype of whatever your solution is and going to test, it's just how important it is to fail fast. Pick yourself up and iterate, change whatever you need to change, go back, test, fail again, and come back. And I think the lesson that we've learned that I would want to pass on to you is, even when you fail, the reason why failing fast is such a good idea is because when you come back, you do not come back the same. You as a human being, as a person, you've learned something, your solution also morphs. And then what you find by failing fast is, if you've defined the problem properly or correctly at the get-go, once you fail fast, you're able to come back and match your solution to the problem. So one of the things that we like to do at Mastercard is we have a program called Start Path. I would want to encourage you all, you just go to www.startpath.com and just look it up. We have very good mentorship programs, but also a matchmaking program, and just tools that can help you learn along the journey. As I said, all this is a partnership. We learn from you, you learn from us, and if there's any opportunities of engagement, we're also really happy to listen and to learn from you.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So make sure you visit startpath.com.
Yeah. You can even just Google StartPath.
Great.
Mastercard StartPath.
Maurice, final words?
Let me pick up from where she talked about learning.
Yeah.
I did say that we are 80 years old, and one of the things that we have had to really get ourselves to be doing is to say, we need to be a learning organization. And what does that mean? It means having the courage to face up to some of the things that we have done and say, yes, it was successful, but it has run its course. And having the courage to change to something else, or to let go and start something else. And so as you go through these things, have the courage to say, we learn from that, and we go on to something else. The second thing really related to that is to imagine, and I can imagine if we were to collect all the smartphones that are in this room, how many we would get. But imagine that smartphone, when did you purchase it? Some purchased theirs maybe yesterday, others purchased theirs 5 years ago. that hardware has remained the same, but whether it is Android or iOS, now and then they send you software upgrades. All of us, as the hardware or as the iPhone 6 Plus or whatever it is, you can remain the same hardware, but how do you get to upgrade your software so that you're performing a lot more efficiently, you're meeting the challenges of today and being capable of dealing with something else, being ready really for tomorrow. So for an old organization like that, I also say that it is extremely important to be in spaces where there are people who really are coming in with kind of the impatience and restlessness of the youth, to kind of say, this is something else that you may not have considered, and having the humility to say that either we didn't get it right in the first place, or that we got it right, but the ground has shifted under our feet. I'll just give you one example of that. We discovered, for example, through some of our learnings, that the way we funded institutions could actually have been the shortest route to how we killed them. You get a very strong, passionate leader, and you say, you know, because of what you are doing, it is important that now you start an institution so that you can work within that institution. And lo and behold, we have killed that person because that person soon begins to worry about overheads, about how to pay staff, and forgets about what they need to do in the first place. And it is our responsibility to accept that we contributed to that, and the next responsibility to have the courage to say, we can't do that, and we can do something else. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Can I add one more thing?
One last one. Yes. I don't know that I've got time. That's why I'm looking over there. Yeah. Okay.
I can?
One. Yeah, a quick one, and then after that, we'll have to wrap up.
Okay. Now, I've just remembered, I picked something up from a session earlier about social enterprises not necessarily having commercial viability and a sense of guilt around earning money by having social enterprises. And I wanted to say, one of the things that we as Mastercard stand for, and we always say that we want to do well by doing good. And I want to pass on the same encouragement to you to say, even if you're doing well, and you're doing good, it doesn't mean that you cannot do well. And sometimes it's not really easy to package social enterprises, even for us in financial inclusion, to be commercially viable. But you know what? They cannot be sustainable if they're not commercially viable. So keep that always at the back of your mind and have no guilt to it. It is important that it's sustainable, even if not for our own generation, for the future generations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for that. We've run out of time, and I mean, this discussion can go on for quite a while. But I guess, you know, it's time to hear your voices. You guys have heard some advice from the panel. And it'll be good to see whether or not, if you've got any questions, I'll take a few. I think I'm trying to see. There's a hand over there. And if you can direct the question to any of the panelists, if you tell us which one you actually want to answer your question, or it could be all of them.
OK, woo. Wow. Thank you very much, Duncan, for moderating. My question is for Yvonne. My name is Mina. I run a fintech company in Kampala. We're actually seeing big challenges with net neutrality, and you mentioned Facebook as you were speaking, and I'm curious to know what Mastercard is doing, because that's really going to stifle innovation in the tech space in East Africa. And
so you said you see challenges where?
With net neutrality. So the specific example, we're building a mobile product, an app, and when you go speak to an entrepreneur to use your app, they think they are connected to the internet, but they are only connected to Facebook, WhatsApp, and Twitter because they have partnerships with the telcos.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, what is Mastercard Foundation, if anything, doing to address that issue in East Africa?
Okay. So firstly, I need to...
Maybe if I take one more question.
Yes.
And then that way we will have, you know, let's see. I'm scanning the room. It looks like that's the only question. So, continue, Yvonne. Maybe some.
So thank you for the question. Firstly, I just want to say that there is a difference between Mastercard Foundation and Mastercard. Mastercard Foundation is a foundation that got formed when Mastercard went public, They took 10% of the shares and created a foundation that was meant to invest in fintech across the globe. And due to legal issues, we actually do not have a relationship with Mastercard Foundation, and hence I cannot speak for Mastercard Foundation. But for Mastercard, Okay. But for Mastercard, we recognize this is actually a challenge that we face as well, and with the technology. So in as much as we're leapfrogging, or we're already there as Africa, we recognize that there's certain pockets, especially in the area of financial inclusion in which we work, where we're not able to have as efficient systems as possible. So for example, like with our agriculture platform, there are areas where we cannot deploy the app, and we have to use USSD. So I think what we've come to learn is look for creative ways of adopting to the technology that is available at the moment, and at the same time continue lobbying. So continue lobbying with ICT Authority here and in Tanzania to see how we can create more fiber optic cabling, just ensure that there's more access to technology and access to Wi-Fi and that sort of thing. But the other thing that I've also come to notice, and I was in Kampala a few weeks ago, and one of the things that really struck me is just how creative the startups are there. One of the startup hubs there, and just being able to use USSD, it's a bit tiresome, and the user experience is not the same as, obviously, as having a smartphone. But just being able to use USSD in the area of healthcare to pass on information is possible. So sometimes we may have to just use the technology that's there, but look at ways of lobbying to get the government to help us move faster. But I also think that people are going to push for it. A lot of consumers are going to push for it, and hopefully we'll move faster than we're currently going at.
I think I actually want to add to that. I don't know if you recall, there was an incident in India, I think it was last year, with the free basics from Facebook, where it became a whole big issue. I couldn't agree more. I'm a big believer in net neutrality. I think that couching free internet connectivity and claiming that, and at the same time restricting access, I don't necessarily buy into that. I also think it's a great opportunity for lobbying. I know that there's a number of groups across Africa, because we know that a lot of those companies have been focusing those efforts across Africa, are trying to lobby, and I'd be happy to share with you one or two that you could have a chat with. But absolutely, it's a lobbying opportunity with governments. I believe that if you're going to give free internet, it should be free, and it should be to whatever site you want to go to. So I'm in agreement with you. Yeah.
Thank you. Maurice, you wanted to say something?
I think just really 2 issues related to that. I do not have, this is not my forte, but one of our thematic areas at the Ford Foundation is called Internet Freedom Thematic Area. And one of the ideas is really to work on this issue of net neutrality, because the rules are written in such a way that you are gamed, so it's really, again, as public interest. So working in a way that all the rules, the background conversations can really provide neutral, space for conversations and all that. But the other thing is to kind of bring back the conversation we had in the morning yesterday with Bob Collymore and Joshua, when they were talking about investing for the long haul and all that. When about 2 years ago, when we kind of started revisiting our strategy, we actually found that on this issue of technology, and we tested this, those of you who know Nairobi, there's a place called the Country Bus Station, and we actually discovered that as we moved into places, geographical spaces that have people with lower incomes, the quality of the net that was being provided was much lower. So where you had some 4G connectivity or 3G in some areas, in some of these places, informal settlements, it was much lower. And if you are talking about governments that are, e-governments, then it means that we are inadvertently and perhaps advertently encouraging inequality by the way investments take place. Because if that is happening in Nairobi or in Kisumu or in Mombasa, you can imagine some other part of this country. And if you are putting your procurement through online systems and all that, you are leaving many, many people behind. And that is why investments must also be value-driven, so that it is long-term and it is really meant to bring everybody and no one is left behind.
I think, we've gotten some great answers for your question. And I'm sure the panel is actually quite capable of answering more questions. I can see still saying Q&A. I still have time? No? So I don't have more time, but I'm sure you guys would actually want to spend some time with Tonia, Yvonne, and Maurice. No, I've been told I don't have time. So I just want to ask you guys to so a big thank you to the panel. These guys are available to meet with you, to talk to you, and I know some of you have been queuing. So thank you so much, Tonia. Thank you so much, Yvonne. Thank you so much, Maurice, and thank you for your insight.